It's Tuesday, the 11th of July, 2023. Welcome to the Fast Five by Fear and Greed, where we give you the top 5 business stories you need to know in just 5 minutes. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, 5 stories in 5 minutes. Let's jump straight into story number 1. The Australian share market has fallen to its lowest level in more than 3 months as fears of deflation in China and a recession in the US and a recession locally all drag on equities.
There have been a number of very weak sessions in recent days, with most sectors falling lower. Yesterday, the S&P ASX 200 closed down 1.5% to just over 7,000 points. It followed a 1.7% drop on Friday. The market's off about 7% since its high early in the year. The immediate catalyst yesterday was Chinese inflation figures. Consumer price index figures show that China has almost no inflation. That ain't good. Every economy needs a bit of inflation. In fact, there are fears that China will have deflation. When there's deflation, people stop spending in the hope that they'll buy something cheaper in the future, and that can send an economy into a deep recession. Then there's fears of a recession in the US and fears of a recession in Australia. The central banks of both economies have made it clear that there are further interest rates in the offing because inflation remains too high and wages pressures abound. AMP chief economist Shane Oliver reckons there's a 50% chance of Australia going into a recession. Hence, equities are struggling.
Which stocks are being hit hardest, Sean?
Well, yesterday, along with most of last week, it was a pretty tough day for the iron ore miners on the back of those low Chinese inflation figures. BHP and Rio were down 1%, while Fortescue Metals Group was off more than 2%. The banks aren't having a great time of it either. Commonwealth Bank is back below $100 a share. National Australia Bank has been one of the worst performing large caps over the past year. The tech stocks have bumped around a bit. Yesterday, they outperformed. WiseTech Global, Xero and REA all did pretty well. Gold's a safe haven in tough times. Gold stocks benefiting, Newcrest Mining, Northern Star Resources, and energy stocks, they continue their outperformance of recent sessions.
Okay, on to story number 2. Anthony Albanese has signed a $1 billion defence export deal with Germany, the first of several announcements, according to the Prime Minister.
Albanese met with his German counterpart Olaf Scholz yesterday after arriving in the country ahead of the NATO summit in Lithuania. Albanese said the new defence export deal was a great outcome for Australia as it would create jobs and boost our defences. The deal includes Australia delivering more than 100 Boxer armed carriers to Germany. Now, building a relationship with Germany also has potential benefits for the local hydrogen industry. Germany is the leading country in terms of manufacturing going greener. It's interested in Australians' green hydrogen supplies to help with an energy deficit brought about by the war in Ukraine. Also, Germany, a nice little ally as we fight to get a free trade deal off the ground with the European Union.
Sean, story number 3 is an interesting one. Dividends are an important part of an investment decision, particularly for many older Australians, and the resource stocks, which until recent years weren't the biggest dividend payers, are now leading the way.
They are. Soaring commodity prices in recent years have triggered a bunch of special dividends and relatively high interim and final dividends. That's from the resource companies. So while the banks and Telstra are thought of as the big dividend players, it really wasn't true last year. Instead, Woodside led the way with the dividend yield, which refers to the full year dividend divided by the share price. A dividend yield of 10.9%, according to a story in The Australian. Fortescue Metals was next at 9%, just above BHP, then Harvey Norman, South32, Perpetual and Tabcorp. ANZ was the best of the banks, yielding 6.6%.
All right, story number 4, Sportsbet, the country's largest online bookmaker, has spent, how about this, $64 million on television ads during live sport and racing events in just the past 18 months. That's more than triple the amount spent by rivals Tabcorp and Ladbrokes.
Confidential spending data compiled by researchers at Nielsen and obtained by the Australian Financial Review shows the extent of spending by bookmakers as the federal government considers whether to place a ban on gambling advertising on television. Most of Sportsbet's ads run in the AFL and NRL seasons, as Wagering Company is the official partner for both codes. Data from March to September, when both competitions run, show more than $32 million was spent in that 6-month period alone, double that for the 18-month period. Entain-owned Ladbrokes and Neds brands spent a combined $38 million from January last year to May. Nielsen's data does not account for in-house stadium advertisements or sponsorship on jerseys, which would also be banned under a government recommendation. Just a huge amount of money being spent in sports gambling ads.
Yeah, sure is. All right, story number 5. Sean, we normally like to lighten things up, something a little bit quirky for story number 5. Today's story is the exact opposite of that. It's actually quite grim. New research reveals for the first time that greenhouse gases from the plastics Australians consume each year is equivalent to pollution from 5.7 million cars or 16 million tonnes. And if nothing happens, that will actually double by 2050.
A new report by the Australian Marine Conservation Society and World Wildlife Fund Australia, reported in the Sydney Morning Herald and Age, calculated for the first time the volume of emissions generated in the production of plastic products Australians use annually. Basically, it found that runaway plastic use is a significant contributor to climate change. We produce about 13% of the plastic we consume. We import the remaining 87%. Australians are heavy plastic users, generating more single-use plastic waste per person than any other country except Singapore. The report argues that Australia has an obligation to consider the greenhouse impacts of all the plastics we import, consume and dispose of.
All right, there we go. The top 5 business stories in 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Tuesday, the 11th of July, 2023. Remember to hit follow on the podcast. And if 5 minutes isn't enough, you can find our longer daily show called Fear and Greed wherever you listen to podcasts, and join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was the Fast 5 by Fear and Greed. Have a great day.